I'm Karen Kenny, coordinator of the San Fernando Valley Patriots. This is the second course in our Patriot Civics 2013 class. This is America 2.0, Patriot or Comrade, by author Don Jans, who wrote My Grandchildren's America. He's here again, Don Jans.
My grandchildren's America. Will it still be the land of the free and the home of the brave? Karen, I want to thank you so much for asking me to come and share. It's always a privilege. It's always very, very humbling to be asked to share your thoughts and ideas with true freedom-loving Americans, and I want to thank all of you. Nonconformists, malcontents, dreamers, adventurers, those seeking to worship God as they saw fit, self-reliant people, fiercely independent people. These are the colonists. These are our founders. I'm going to tell you the same thing today that I say to every group to whom I speak. I say it on radio broadcasts, and I say it in my book. It is not my intent to try to change or try to persuade anybody's way of thinking. My only purpose is to present you with facts, present them fairly, simply, straightforward, no spin, and no political correctness. What we're going to do today over the next several minutes is we are going to look at the attitudes, the principles, and the ethics of those people we call the colonists, of those people we call our founders. Then we're going to look at the attitudes, the principles, and the ethics of a group of people that have chosen to follow the teachings, they have chosen to follow the philosophy of a 19th century Prussian philosopher. I want you to come back with me. We're going to go back to December 20th of 1606. We find on that day that there are 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Discovery, and the Godspeed. They are leaving England. Aboard are 105 passengers, all men. 104 of them will survive that voyage. This group, the largest number of them, are made up of people, primarily 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th sons of some of the wealthier families in England, and they are searching. They are going to the New World to search for fortune and to search for adventure. The other group, largest group, is made up of some hardened sailors. These are men who have sailed in the navy of Queen Elizabeth I. They've sailed in the navy of King James I. They have faced many, many trials. They have faced many, many tribulations. Included in this group is one by the name of John Smith. History records him as Captain John Smith, and of course he is noted for leading these early colonists through many trials and through many tribulations. These ships arrived at the outer banks of what we now know as Virginia, late April of 1607. They sail into the bay. They sail up a river that we now call the James River. They're looking for a place where they can start a settlement. And they're looking primarily for a place that has a good defensive position. On May 13th of 1607, they find such a place. And the first permanent English colony in the New World, known as Jamestown, is started. They are led through many trials and many tribulations and secure that spot so that by October of 1608, the first English women arrived in that colony. We owe a great deal of gratitude. We owe them a huge debt, for it was there in that first settlement were 2 of the very principles that propelled that emerging nation to become called that shining city upon a hill. Many people call it the Great American Experiment. It was here where those two principles were started. These colonists quickly learned and understood that the way productive property are transferred in England, the way you gained ownership of productive property in England would not work here in the new colony. That idea that productive property would be passed from father to eldest son, who became a father, passed to an eldest son, or where it was passed on by royal decree, just was not practical here in the New World. So they started a system, a unique system. They said the ownership of productive property will be based on the attributes of the individual. Anybody who has the aptitude, the energy, that wants to take and own productive property, they can have that opportunity and they can build that productive property into anything they want. We now know this as unlimited opportunity, or as capitalism. That was begun in Jamestown. We move ahead to July of 1619, and we find that there is a group of these colonists, and they are meeting in a church, and they call themselves a General Assembly. The individuals that are meeting are called representatives. They're called representatives because they have been selected or they have been elected by other colonists to represent them in this General Assembly. And we have the idea of representative government. Capitalism on limited opportunity. Representative government came from that first permanent English colony known as Jamestown. About the time those ships in 1606 sailed for the new land, there was another group of people in England that decided they were going to leave England, but they were going to go across the English Channel. They were going to go to Holland. Because what they learned is they were not able to worship God as they wanted to worship God in England. The Anglican Church, the Church of England, was saying, you must worship the way we tell you to worship. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. So they moved over to Holland, believing that they were going to be able to worship with less interference. That was true. They were able to worship with less interference, but they were not able to worship without interference. So we find in the late summer, early fall of 1620, 102 men, women, and children of the group known as the Separatists, later to be called the Pilgrims. They board the Mayflower. They set sail for the New World, and on November 11th of 1620, they arrived at the tip of the Cape of Cod, or Cape Cod. Thank you. 36 days later, they disembarked the Mayflower at Plymouth, Massachusetts. And the idea that you can pray when, where, and how you want. The idea that you can read the Bible when and where you want is established in the New World. What happens is many other people over in Europe hear about this, and they say, we want that same opportunity. We also want to be able to worship God as we see fit. And so we find Baptists, Calvinists, Quakers, Catholics, Lutherans, people from all different denominations. They sail across the Atlantic to the New World so they too can worship God as they believe they should. We find many of these people, they land in the mid-Atlantic states. When they get off their ships, they live in the same community as people from other denominations. They live side by side, they conduct business together. Many times they'll build one ship or one church. They'll build one church, and they will, all different denominations worship in that church. They will also use that church for community activities. We find many, many other people coming to the New World for all kinds of different reasons. We find people who are second, third, fourth sons of people in all different countries, and they come over here and hearing about unlimited opportunity, hearing about freedom, they said, I want part of that. We find people who came over, they didn't have the money to buy their own ticket, so they sold their services. For a number of years, they were called indentured servants. So badly did they want that unlimited opportunity. So badly did they want that freedom. Then we find people who couldn't pay their debts. We find people who just would not conform to the political systems in Europe. We find people who could not conform to the societal dictates in Europe. We find people who had committed crimes against society. And the different central governments, the large governments said, we would sooner buy a ticket, one-way ticket to the New World and send them over to the New World than to house them in jails in our countries because it's less expensive. People came for all kinds of reasons. And what we find is this cacophony of people built these colonists into the crown jewel of the British Empire. And those people who were running that large central government in England looked across the sea and they said, wow, look at what those people have done. Look at the prosperity they have built. Why, do they not realize they are the subjects? We are the rulers. They owe us a part of what they have created. And they started to tax these people. Then those members of that large central government over in Europe, over in England, looked back across the Atlantic again and they said, those colonists, they're becoming too self-reliant. Those colonists, they're becoming too independent. Do they not understand? They are the subjects. They are the servants. We in the government, we are the rulers. And they started to place limitations on their political activities. They started to place limitations on their individual freedoms. And in the colonies, we started to feel some dissent. We started to feel some rebellion attitudes. And finally, those members of that strong central government in England looked over at the American colonies and they said, you know what? We are going to place a tax on their tea. Not only are we going to place a tax on their tea, but we are going to tell them from what company they can buy that tea. People in Massachusetts who were the most rebellious said, no, that's not going to happen. Sam Adams and some of his friends go aboard those ships and they throw that tea into the harbor of Boston. Those members, those people in that large central government over in England said, we don't like that. Servants, you don't treat your rulers that way. And they said, therefore, you people in Massachusetts, we're going to place on you the coercive acts. Many of us have learned those as the intolerable acts. And what did that do? It placed even greater economic limitations on those people in Massachusetts. It placed even greater limitations on their political activities. It placed even greater limitations on their individual freedoms. And the other colonists up and down the seaboard looked up at Massachusetts and they declared and they decided, we must support those people in Massachusetts. For when the people in a large central government can and will place those kind of restrictions on one colony or on one colonist, they will place those restrictions on all colonies and on all colonists eventually. We must support those people in Massachusetts. And so we see the colonists starting to unite. And then we find out that the English have decided that they are going to go out into the hills of Massachusetts. And they are going to take the ammunition, the guns they think these people have stored, and they are going to take them away from what they consider rebellious servants. We find on the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. Paul Revere rode through the countryside. shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming," and the Minutemen grabbed their muskets and they ran out to confront those redcoats, the soldiers of the most powerful nation in the world at that time. Shortly thereafter, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill, and the Revolutionary War has begun. The rest of the colonists have decided they're going to get together in their meeting down in Philadelphia. Early July 1776, these colonists decide they are going to sign a paper that they call the Declaration of Independence. And this Declaration of Independence, against all odds, declares that we will be a free and an independent people. We will no longer serve the evil large central government over in London. Large central government has no place in a free society, they say. Against all odds, 5 years later, General Cornwallis surrenders to General Washington, and they are a free and an independent people. So they put into effect what they call the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation tell us what their mindset was at the time. They were deathly afraid of big central government. They had seen the evil of a large central government. And in the Articles of Confederation, they make no allowance for a president. They make no allowance for executive agencies. They make no allowance for a federal judiciary. In fact, they don't even make an allowance for the federal government to tax them. They say, you, the central government, what you can do is you can negotiate with foreign powers. You can declare war and peace. You can mediate if we colonies have disputes. That's your power. Didn't work. They had to decide, will we become 13 independent nations, or are we going to become 13 independent governmental units under one central nation? And they decide on the latter. So they go to work and they write what they call the United States Constitution. And in this United States Constitution, we find that same fear of central government. They understand the evils of large central government. And they say, we are going to construct a government that has 3 co-equal branches of government. And we are going to give checks and balances, not to enhance the power of the central government, but to limit the power of the central government. Then in Article 1, they list a number of powers, and they say, these are your powers, central government. And even with those limitations, my friends, even with those limitations, they could not have that Constitution ratified. They had to go back to work. They dropped what they call the Bill of Rights, or what we know as the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Every single one of those amendments, every single one of them, either limits the powers of the federal government or it enhances the power of the people. Until we get to the 10th Amendment. And when we get to that 10th Amendment, what we find is it says very specifically, if the power is not specifically given to the federal government, it is reserved for the states, it is reserved for the people. They declare, we the people, we are the rulers, you in central government, you are our servants. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, said it's that 10th Amendment. That is the foundation of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson also said, and I want you to listen very, very, very carefully. Thomas Jefferson said, freedom is lost gradually by an uninterested, an uninformed, and an uninvolved people. We're going to change scenes now. We're going to go back to Europe. We're going to go to the year 1818. In Europe, we're going to go to the southwestern corner of Prussia. We're going to go to the Moselle Valley, to a town called Trier. We find there's a couple that lives there. He is an attorney. He has a very, very prosperous law practice, makes well above the average earnings of the people in the community. She came from a wealthy family back in Holland, and she brought a very substantial dowry to this marriage. So well is this couple doing that they go and they buy a vineyard in the Moselle Valley. We find on May 5th of 1818, Heinrich and Henrietta Marx have their second child, their first and their only son. And they name him Karl Marx. Karl Marx grows up in this town, Trier, in this well-off family. He is sent to the finest schools or the finest gymnasiums in Trier. He's a good student, but he's not a great student. He does not have an aptitude for math. Later on in life, he says, I just never understood numbers. After he graduates from high school or gymnasium, he and his dad decide that he should go up the river to Bonn, go to the University of Bonn. His dad thinks he's going there to study law. He goes there for 1 year. They decide he should now go on to Berlin University. When he gets to Berlin University, he starts to study what he really wants to study, and that's not law. He starts to become involved in philosophy. He finds that there is a group of students, a group of professors that get together, and this group gets together for the purpose of discussing and debating the teachings of a Prussian philosopher who has recently died, George F.W. Hegel. Prior to his death, Hegel happened to be a professor at Berlin University. Hegel defined freedom this way. Hegel said freedom is when the individual has the right to make a rational decision without coercion. Unfortunately, he continued that definition and he said absolute freedom is when that rational decision is made in total accordance with the universal principles of the state. This idea of conformity, of total equality, this idea became the bedrock of the philosophy that one of those young students, Karl Marx, took away and when he developed that theory of Marxism, his philosophy. Karl Marx said, it is the ownership of private productive property. How the ownership of private productive property has transformed over the years. It is this that has caused all the problems in society. For he explained that in very early society, all of this private productive property was under the control, the regulation, the ownership of the state, the community, or the government. You use your own terms, and all benefits thereof would come or inure to that entity. Marx said that private productive property in very early society was always under the control, the ownership, or the regulation of the state, the government, or the people. But over time, it had transformed to where that private productive property, before we go on to that, let me say, what was private productive property? What do we mean when we say private productive property? What we mean is that property that brings benefits to its owners. Could be things like land, where we own land, we rent land, we grow grapes on land, and we sell the grapes, and we receive revenue. Things like buildings, we build buildings, and we rent those buildings, and we receive the revenue. Machinery. Things like factories, we build factories, and we have those factories sell products, we receive that revenue. Marx went on to explain, this includes smaller businesses, it includes service businesses. And as Marx explained, and as we have been recently told by one of his disciples, these are businesses that you, the individuals, you did not build those businesses. As Marx explained, and as we have been told by one of his disciples very recently, these businesses are not built by individuals, they are built through the communal efforts of the community, and therefore the revenues, the benefits thereof, should inure to the benefit of the community as well. Marx said, this private productive property in early society was owned by the community, the state, or the government, and over time that ownership had transformed to the point in time where that ownership is now held by individuals. It's now held by capitalists. And it is this that has brought about more than one class in society. And when you have more than one class in society, you have conflicts. You have oppressors and you have oppressed. Marx went on to say, it is not the defining attribute to abolish property generally, but to abolish all private productive property. For it is private productive property that brings about, that causes all the conflicts in the world. It is private productive property that causes all the evils in the world. It is private productive property that causes the oppression of the many by the few. Marx said it is the aim of Marxism. It is the aim of Marxism to abolish the individuality, the independence, and the freedom of the capitalist. He said, my disciples, you must go and you must gain political supremacy. And when you gain political supremacy, you must wrest degree by degree the capital from the capitalist, and you must centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state. This has been accomplished, Marx said, you will have completed the fundamental transformation from capitalism to a fair and just classless society that is totally equal and is totally conforming. For now there will be only one class in society. And when we have only one class in society, well, we have a fair and just society. We have a society that operates in total unity. This is true, he said, socially, politically, and economically. And the rule of thumb economically will be from each, according to his abilities, to each, according to his needs. Marx said, all proceeds of labor, or the gross domestic product, must be shared fairly with all members of society, whether they are working or not. What did he mean by this? How is this supposed to work? Marx came up with two different formulas. He has an evil formula and he has a good formula. His evil formula describes capitalism. And if you can picture this, that evil formula is M equals C equals M1. When we look at that first M, that stands for money, for capital, for investment. And that money, capital investment, is taken and it's used to build measures so that you can build commodities, you can build products. And that's the C. Investment is used to build those products. Then what you do with those products is you take them and you sell them for your original investment plus something. And this plus something is that evil profit. This plus something is that surplus value he talks about. That money that he claims the capitalist has stolen from the workers. He says it's even worse than that, because those evil capitalists will now take that profit or that surplus value, and they will go out and they will find ways to create even greater divisions of labor and even bring down more the worth of the worker. Besides that, he says they might even go out and they might even innovate and create ways to even eliminate workers. We were given an example of this during the campaign of 2012 when the Marxist Progressive candidate was going around and he looked at an automatic bank teller and he said, see that evil of capitalism? They just took the job of a worker. And that's what Marx meant with that evil formula. His formula that brings us total equality and total conformity and total unity is C equals M equals C. Let's take a look at that first C over here. This C stands for commodities. It stands for that product that the worker will build. Marx explained the worker is at his greatest value. He is receiving his greatest satisfaction when there are no divisions of labor, when he takes that raw material to finished product. This is when he says the worker is at his greatest value and he is receiving his greatest satisfaction. The fewer the divisions of labor, the better. Now, Marx also acknowledged, he said that due to the differences in humans, that C will vary. That C will vary as opposed to, that C will vary based on quantity and quality of the product. Those who are physically stronger might be able to produce more faster. Those who have greater manual dexterity could produce more faster. Those who have a higher aptitude, those who have greater intellect, those who have more energy, those who just have greater ambition could produce a different quantity and a different quality. That C will vary. We go to that last C on the other side of the equation and we find out that C stands for commodities the worker needs. I want you to understand, I said the commodities that workers need. I did not say the commodities workers need, want, or desire. For in this wonderful, wonderful state of being, there will be no wants or desires. We only have needs. Wants or desires are for that evil capitalistic society. And those needs are going to be defined by the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, Marx acknowledged, he said, that C is going to vary as well. That C is going to vary if we have a worker who has only themselves. They're going to have fewer needs than will that worker who has themselves and a spouse. They will have fewer needs than will that worker who has themselves, a spouse, and other dependents. So we find both C's vary. The production and the needs. We come to that M in the middle. That stands for money or medium of exchange. The big question is, on what is that based? From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. What the worker receives is only based on his needs. It has no relevance whatsoever to his production. Thus we have a total, equal, and conforming society. Marx became quite excited in February of 1848. For we go into Paris, France, and we find that there's been this riot. This riot erupts into a revolution. That revolution spreads from France eastward throughout Europe. And Marx says, yes, 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 this is the revolution to bring about my fair and my just, totally equal, totally conforming society. Over the next 12 to 18 months, the militaries of those different sovereign nations had completely squelched those revolutions. Marx looks around, we look around, and we find out very little in Europe has changed. There's still a capitalistic society. There's not a fair and just so-called classless society. And Marx has to say, why? What happened? And he comes to several different conclusions. He says, it's that military. It's the military. They are the last bastion between capitalism and a fair and a just classless society. Therefore, that military has to be systematically dismantled. Not only did he say that military has to be systematically dismantled, he told them how to do it. He said, my disciples, when you gain political supremacy, what you do is you take funds that would normally fund that military and you divert them to social programs. And this will systematically dismantle that military and it will render it inconsequential. Marx also said, my disciples, you must have a vicious class warfare against that capitalist, against the bourgeoisie. In today's society, we hear that vicious class warfare from his disciples against the millionaire, against the billionaire, against the corporate jet owner, against those earning over $250,000 a year, against the business owner, against those who are not Marxists. And they employ the same tactics Marx said you must employ. They have no bearing whatsoever on truth. Truth is totally irrelevant in their class warfare. For after all, the only thing that matters is that the ends justify the means. Marx also came to the conclusion. He said, perhaps, just perhaps, my fair and just classless society will not emerge through a revolution. Instead, we're going to have policies, procedures. We're going to have actions. We're going to have a fundamental transformation from a fair and free capitalistic society to this fair and just classless society that is totally equal and totally conforming. So Marx sat down and he said, what should these policies, what should these procedures, what should these actions be? You need to know them. You need to know absolutely every one of them. They're not just the 10 in the Communist Manifesto. You need to know them because they're happening this very day. They're happening right here in these United States. Marx said, you must have a steeply progressive income tax. It's the best way to share the wealth. It also punishes those who have the audacity to strive for achievement and strive for excellence. What Marx didn't do is he didn't define what steeply progressive means. But we find in October of 1942, the Marxist progressives defining what they mean by steeply progressive. They also define what they mean by not having any regard whatsoever for the Constitution of the United States, because the Marxist progressive president at that time signs an executive order. That executive order was defeated twice that same year by Congress. And he said, you know what, I could care less about the co-equal branches of government. I could care less about checks and balances because I deem, as a Marxist progressive, this is good. And so he signs an executive order. And in that executive order, he says, I direct the secretary to bring forth regulations to tax all income over $25,000. When we look at $25,000 in 1942, it's approximately $250,000 today, maybe a little more. He says, I direct the secretary to bring forth regulations to tax, or should we say to confiscate, all income over $25,000 at 100%. Then he said, this is equal. This is fair and this is just in that same executive order. Marx said, you must have a death tax and it has to be 100%. After all, that property that would have been transferred from generation to generation, that really is the property of the state, the government, or the community. It's just being returned to its rightful owner. Besides that, he said, those who would have received it, they didn't do anything for it. They really don't deserve it. I was listening to the Megyn Kelly show a little over a year ago. She had as her guest Congresswoman from Florida, Democratic Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Question was, what should the death tax be? The answer should be 100% because that property really is the property of the government, and those who would have received it did nothing for it and don't deserve it. Marx said, the state must have a monopoly on granting credit. The way the capitalist grants credit is wrong, he said. You do not grant credit based on ability and willingness to repay. You grant credit for the purpose of sharing the wealth and for the purpose of social engineering. And he who has the power to grant the credit has the power to forgive the credit. The state must have a monopoly on granting credit. Marx said, the state must control all communications within the borders. We go back to July 5th of 2013. In one of those infamous paper drops, we find the current Marxist progressive president signed an executive order a little over 2,000 words. This executive order said, in case of national emergency, and national emergency was never defined. In case of national emergency, the state has the right to grant or grab control of all communications within the borders. Marx said, you must bankrupt the capitalist countries. They must be bankrupt. You must raise their debt as fast and as high as you can. What that will do when that bankrupts that country, it will render all of the contracts of the capitalists null and void. And when that happens, the populace will switch their allegiance, if it was there, they will switch their allegiance from them to you, and you will be able to move that fair and just classless society just that much further along the road to our day of utopia. Marx said, you can no longer allow the forces of the marketplace, competitive forces, to drive the business community. It is imperative that you centralize all activity, all economic activity under the strong central government. It all must be centralized so you have complete and total control. Today, every single day, our business community becomes a less and a less free business community. Today, every single day, we become a less free people. Today, every single day, our big central government, the antithesis of what our founders envisioned and implemented, passes more and more regulations by non-elected officials, in fact, to take more and more of our freedoms away. Today, every single day, the disciples of Marx move forward in the implementation of his demands. For today, every single day, the Marxist progressives take more and more of our freedom so they can have the dictatorship of the proletariat, implement the totalitarian state that is absolutely necessary, as Marx said, to bring about the complete fundamental transformation from the capitalistic and free society to his fair and his just classless society that is controlled and operated through the dictatorship of the proletariat. Freedom is lost gradually by an uninterested, an uninformed, and an uninvolved people. I want to move us now to the year 1840. We find that there's a young reporter that wants to write a story on why did those colonists, why did they risk everything against the most powerful nation in the world at that time? He finds an elderly gentleman who's 90 years old at the time. His name, Levi Preston. Levi Preston was one of those Minutemen who grabbed his musket and ran out to Lexington, ran out to Concord to confront those redcoats. He stayed in the army of General George Washington, and by the end of the Revolution, Levi Preston was known as Captain Levi Preston. Young reporter goes out, his questions in tow. First question to Captain Preston is, Captain Preston, was it the oppression of the evil British government that you felt that drove you to this revolution? Captain Preston thinks hard and says, No, I didn't feel any oppression. I don't know of any of my friends that felt oppression. Young reporter goes on to his next question and says, well then, Captain Preston, would it have been your reading of the Enlightenment authors, Rousseau and Voltaire, that it told you you should be a free and independent people? Now, Captain Preston smiles, looks at the young reporter and says, "Son, we didn't have time to read people like that. Why, when we had time to read, we would read the Bible." No, it wasn't anything like that. Young reporter says, "Well then, Captain Preston, it must have been that Stamp Act, that tea tax." Captain Preston says, "You know what? I never bought one of those stamps. I don't know of anybody that did. And well, Sam Adams and the boys, they took care of that tea when they threw it into the Boston Harbor. No, it wasn't anything like that." Frustrated now, the young reporter says, "Captain Preston, what was it?" Captain Preston becomes serious. He looks at the young man and he says, "Well, you see, son, we had always been a free people. We were a free people. And those redcoats intended we no longer be free. Today, it is those Marxist progressives who intend that we no longer be free. Today, it is those Marxist progressives who tell us that that capitalistic system that built this country into the greatest economic engine the world has ever seen, that capitalistic system is evil. That capitalistic system causes all poverty. Why, it's that capitalistic system that limits opportunity, brings about inequality. They tell us that capitalistic system must be abolished and it must be replaced by a fair and a just, classless society that is totally equal, that is totally conforming, and that is ruled by the dictatorship of the proletariat. Today, we are a less free people than we were on March 20th of 1775. We find March 20th of 1775, the General Assembly of Virginia is meeting in Richmond. They're meeting in a church. One of the representatives arises to rebut another representative that has just said, "We must be more tolerant with the British." He has just said, "We must be more patient with the British. We must give them more time." Well, we must be more reasonable with the British. And Patrick Henry, after an eloquent rebuttal, had this stirring call for action, and I want to quote Patrick Henry when he said, "Is life so sweet? Is peace so dear? As to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may choose, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." To paraphrase Captain Preston Levy, we were a free people. We are a less free people today, and those Marxist progressives intend that we no longer be a free people. My call to action to you today is I beg you to join me in my efforts to interest, to inform, and to involve all freedom-loving Americans, so we can bequeath to our children and our grandchildren that capitalist system of unlimited opportunity, that freedom that those colonists, our founders, bequeathed to us. And in closing, I want to echo the proclamation of our children and our grandchildren for that priceless gift to them when they say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And thank you so much for your attention.